In Texas, a phone call from my mother broke my marriage, and I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. It was just another typical Tuesday afternoon when everything in my life changed. I had spent the morning running errands, grocery shopping, picking up dry cleaning, and dealing with some mundane administrative tasks. The sort of things that kept me busy, but never took up all my attention. Life was peaceful, at least on the surface. Tom, my husband of 25 years, had been more distant lately, but I chalked that up to work stress. He had always been the type to bury himself in his work when things weren't going well. I thought nothing of it, until the phone rang. It was my mother. She wasn't one to call often, but when she did, I knew it was important. I picked up without hesitation, not even glancing at the caller ID. "Hi, Mom," I said, not expecting what was coming next. "Honey, you need to sit down," she said. Her voice was steady but laced with a nervous energy that I immediately recognized. My mother had never been one to panic easily, so hearing that tone in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. "What's wrong?" I asked, suddenly alert. "I saw Tom today," she began, and my stomach dropped. "He was with another woman." The words hit me like a freight train. My mother had never been a fan of Tom. She always thought he was aloof, a bit too absorbed in his work, but this was different. I had always brushed aside her concerns, assuming they were just her overprotective instincts kicking in. But now, hearing this, hearing her say it, my entire world tilted. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice suddenly shaky. "With another woman? Where? What are you talking about?" "I was at the cafe on Main Street," she continued, her words measured but tight with emotion. "I saw them together, laughing, talking like they were a couple. They were holding hands, I'm telling you. I'm sorry, honey, but it's the truth." I froze. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. The ground beneath me felt suddenly unstable, like the foundation of my entire life was crumbling. How could this be? Tom was always so focused on our family. He was distant, yes, but never unfaithful. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I wouldn't lie about something like this," she said, her voice softening but still full of that underlying anxiety. "I just thought you should know. You need to confront him. I don't want you to go on living in the dark." I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to scream, to cry, but instead, I felt numb. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the thudding of my heart in my chest. Tom, the man I'd married, the father of our children, was with someone else? I didn't know what to believe. I hung up the phone without saying much more. My mind was racing. I had so many questions. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed? Was it recent? My gut told me this wasn't a one-time thing. No, this felt like something that had been going on for months, maybe even longer. And yet, how had I missed it? Had I really been that blind? I looked around our home, the one we had built together, and felt like I didn't recognize it. There was a heaviness in the air now, a silence that wasn't there before. I felt like an outsider in my own life. How could this be happening? How had I missed the signs? I couldn't just sit here. I needed to do something. I had to confront him, but where would I even begin? Tom had always been the picture of stability. He had a job that took him away from home for long hours, but I never questioned him. I never thought that could be a red flag. I never imagined this. A few hours later, Tom walked in, just as I had been expecting. The door creaked open, and he came in with his usual smile, his briefcase in hand. He was so familiar, yet, in that moment, I couldn't stand to look at him. I stood in the living room, watching as he closed the door behind him, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "Hey, babe," he said, setting down his things. "How was your day?" His tone was light, casual. But to me, it sounded like an act. "Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We need to talk." He looked up at me, pausing for a moment. What's going on? You look pale. I wasn't sure how to start. Should I just say it outright? Should I tell him what I knew, or should I wait, give him a chance to explain himself? I didn't know how much longer I could pretend I didn't already know the truth. Mom called me today, I began, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. She saw you with another woman. Tom's face went pale in an instant. His smile faded, and his eyes darted to the floor as if trying to avoid my gaze. His body tensed, his posture rigid. I saw it then, the fear. Fear that I would find out, that I would confront him with what he had done. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, frozen in place, as if trying to gather his thoughts. I waited for him to speak, but when he didn't, I pushed forward. What's going on, Tom? Why didn't you tell me? Who is she? Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. Her name is Emily, he said, looking at me now with a mixture of guilt and shame. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. My mind couldn't process it. Tom? My Tom? With someone else? How long had this been happening? I never meant for it to happen, he continued, his eyes downcast. It just happened. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I didn't have the strength. The pain was too much. How long? I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't know, maybe 6 months. Maybe more, he admitted. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt as though the room was spinning. My heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. How could this happen? How had I been so blind? I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. My mind was overwhelmed, my body numb. The man I had trusted for so long, the man I had shared my life with, had been living a double life. And now, everything was different. I didn't know how to go on from here, but I knew I couldn't stay here, in this house, with him. I need some space, I said, my voice barely audible. I need to think. I need to figure out what to do. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't even bear to be in the same space. I needed to get away. I didn't know what came next. But I knew this, everything had changed. The following days felt like I was moving through a fog. The house, once filled with the routine noises of family life, now felt hollow. I couldn't escape the image of Tom and Emily together, laughing and holding hands, like everything I had built with him meant nothing. He seemed genuinely remorseful, but the damage was done. His apology didn't change the fact that he had betrayed me, that his heart had clearly been somewhere else long before I ever knew. I spent the first few days in a haze of disbelief and anger. I couldn't stop thinking about what my mother had told me. I replayed that moment of discovery over and over in my head. How had I missed the signs? Tom was distant, sure, but he had always been that way. It was easy to rationalize it as stress from work, or just his personality. The thought that there could be someone else was completely outside the realm of possibility. And yet, here I was, standing on the edge of the truth, unable to turn back. But I wasn't ready to just let it go. Tom may have confessed, but there was still one thing I needed to do: confront Emily. The woman who had somehow waltzed into my life, into my family's life, and stole him from me. I needed to hear it from her. I needed to know what she had to say. Tom had told me her name, Emily, just a name. It didn't mean anything to me yet. I had no idea what she looked like or what her life was like, but she was the reason everything was falling apart. So, I decided to find her. I couldn't let this go on without understanding what had happened. The first step was to gather information. I did what anyone would do: I Googled her name. It wasn't difficult to find out where she worked. There, in bold letters, was the name of a local gallery. Emily Parks. The thought of her name on that screen made me feel sick to my stomach. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I went to the gallery the next morning, not sure what I would say when I saw her. My heart was racing as I walked through the door. It was a small, quiet place, filled with art that seemed to reflect a different world, one where people didn't lie, didn't cheat, didn't destroy marriages. A woman in her late 30s, dressed in an elegant black blouse, approached me. She had a confident, almost practiced air about her, as if she had dealt with people like me before. She smiled politely, but there was something distant in her eyes. I couldn't place it, but it was the look of someone who had secrets they were desperately trying to hide. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm looking for Emily Parks." The woman's smile faltered, just for a moment, and I saw her glance at the door, as if hoping I would leave. But instead, I pushed forward. "I need to speak with her. It's urgent." She hesitated but then nodded. "Let me go check if she's available." "Please, have a seat." I sat on a nearby bench, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to avoid the confrontation altogether. But I knew I couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. I needed to face the woman who had been with my husband. A few minutes later, Emily herself appeared from a back room. She was taller than I expected, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She looked at me curiously, but her expression quickly hardened as she realized who I was. There was no recognition in her eyes, but there was a certain guardedness. "I'm Emily," she said, extending a hand. "How can I help you?" I didn't take her hand. I couldn't. Instead, I stood up and stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "You've been seeing my husband," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tom." 4 months, apparently. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't flinch. I don't know what you think you know, but I'm not sure how this is any of your business." The nerve of her. She was trying to play the innocent, like she hadn't stolen my life, like she hadn't been the one to betray me. The rage that had been simmering inside me boiled over. "Don't act like you didn't know," I said, my voice growing steadier with each word. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew I was married. You knew about our family. You knew about me." Emily's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I didn't plan this," she said, her voice cool. "I didn't set out to hurt you. But you don't know what's been going on between Tom and me. You don't know how complicated things are." "Complicated?" I echoed, incredulous. "You think this is about complications? You've been seeing my husband for months, and you're telling me this is complicated?" She sighed, stepping back slightly, as if I were suddenly too much for her to handle. "Look, I'm sorry. But I didn't come here to fight with you. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Tom and we had something. But if it helps, he is planning to end it with me. He said it wasn't going anywhere." The words hit me like a slap in the face. "He's ending it?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Is that supposed to make me feel better? He was going to just end it after everything he's done? After everything he's put me through?" I was shaking now, tears stinging my eyes. I tried to hold them back, but the dam was breaking. How could she be so calm about this? How could she act like nothing was wrong? Emily looked at me for a long moment, and then, almost as if deciding something, she stepped closer. "I never wanted to be the other woman. I never wanted to hurt you. But things just happened." I shook my head, stepping back from her. I couldn't hear any more of her excuses. She wasn't sorry, she was just trying to justify her actions. She wanted to walk away from this clean, with no consequences. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not when I had to rebuild my entire life from the wreckage she had caused. "I came here for answers," I said, my voice low but steady. "And I got them. But don't think for a second that this is over. You may have Tom now, but there's still the matter of the consequences. The ones you'll face when the truth comes out. Emily didn't say anything more. She just stood there, her eyes downcast, like she knew I wasn't finished yet. I turned and walked out of the gallery, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air behind me. I had the answers, but they only brought more pain. The truth had a way of doing that, I guess. Now, it was time to figure out what came next. It had been 2 days since I confronted Emily at the gallery. The anger was still simmering beneath the surface, but the rage that had consumed me in those first moments was fading, replaced by something colder, determination. I wasn't going to let Tom off the hook that easily. I needed to know more. There had to be more to this than just him finding someone else. What had really happened between them? Was he lying to me now? Why hadn't I seen it coming? I was still reeling from the conversation with Emily. To my surprise, she had barely tried to justify herself. She'd admitted she'd been seeing Tom for months, but there was no remorse in her eyes, just a cold, detached look that made it clear she had no real guilt over what she had done. She hadn't even apologized. Instead, she'd told me that Tom was planning to end it with her. Like that would somehow make everything better. But it wasn't enough. I still had unanswered questions. I needed to know how deep this affair ran, how long it had been going on, and, most importantly, what Tom had been hiding from me. And if there was one thing I knew about Tom, it was that he was careful. He wouldn't just leave a trail of evidence. But I had to try. I couldn't let him keep me in the dark any longer. The day after I confronted Emily, I found myself standing in front of Tom's office. I hadn't told him I was coming. I didn't want him to know what I was doing. I wasn't here to accuse him, not yet, anyway. But I was here to find out what I could. I walked into the office building, trying to act normal, like I was just another person on their lunch break. But my stomach was in knots, and I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that I was doing something I shouldn't. I had always trusted Tom completely, but now I was about to cross a line I never thought I'd cross, snooping around in his private life. The receptionist gave me a polite smile as I entered, but she didn't know who I was. She didn't even know I was married to Tom. I walked past her desk, my heart beating in my throat as I made my way to the elevator. Tom's office was on the top floor, just like everything else in his life, expensive, impressive, and private. I waited for the elevator to reach the top floor, glancing around nervously. I knew what I was doing was risky, but I had to know. It was the only way. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out into a large, open office area. Tom's office was at the far end of the hallway, behind a set of glass doors. I paused, taking a deep breath before I walked towards it. The office was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I checked the hallway. Empty. Good. I reached for the handle, and the door clicked open. I stepped inside, looking around quickly to make sure I wasn't being watched. Tom's office was exactly what I had expected, modern, sleek, and pristine. Everything in its place, the way he liked it. But then, as I glanced around, something caught my eye. On his desk, buried under a pile of paperwork, was a small, silver key. It wasn't the kind of key you'd find lying around in an office. It was a key that looked important, like it might open something that mattered. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my fingers. There was no label, no clue as to what it might open. But I knew one thing for sure, it wasn't just a random key. It was a key to something. The question was, what? I tucked it into my pocket quickly and began searching the rest of his office. I rifled through the drawers, looking for anything that could give me more information. But everything was locked tight. I could tell that Tom had been careful, maybe even anticipating that someone might snoop around someday. I couldn't let it go. The key was too strange, too out of place. But I couldn't figure out what it meant just yet. I would have to wait for the right moment to find out. As I was about to leave the office, I noticed something else, an envelope, slightly askew, tucked behind a framed photo of our family. It was an envelope with Tom's name on it, written in bold black ink. My heart skipped a beat. It was too tempting to ignore. I had to see what it was. Slowly, I slid the envelope out from behind the photo and opened it. Inside was a thick, yellowed document. It looked old. Very old. I pulled it out, carefully unfolding the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Tom's. But this wasn't a casual note. This was something serious. The letter read, "I will never forget our arrangement. But the time is coming, and we must both act before it's too late. She will find out soon enough, and we must be prepared." I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. What was this about? What arrangement? What did this mean? I quickly stuffed the letter back into the envelope and shoved it back into its hiding place. My mind was racing. Had Tom been planning this affair all along? Had he been preparing for something? What had he meant by, "we must be prepared"? I didn't know what to make of it, but it was clear that Tom had been involved in something far more complicated than I had initially realized. This wasn't just a random affair. There was something deeper here, something that involved more than just him and Emily. I couldn't stop now. I had to find out what it all meant. And I would. The following days were a blur of frantic searching and sleepless nights. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter I'd found in Tom's office. It had shaken me to my core. Our arrangement. Who was he talking about? And why did it feel like I was being drawn into something much bigger than I could ever have imagined? I had spent hours trying to make sense of everything. The key, the letter, Emily, nothing added up. There was something Tom wasn't telling me, something I was still missing. The affair, I could understand, painful as it was. But the secrecy, the cryptic message in that letter? That was something else entirely. I knew I couldn't figure it out alone. As much as it pained me to admit it, I needed help. I turned to my old friend, Linda, who worked as a private investigator. I had known Linda for years. She'd been there when Tom and I first met. She'd even helped us out when we bought our house. But this was different. This was personal. I hated the idea of involving anyone else, but I didn't know what else to do. Linda agreed to meet me for coffee, and we sat at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the hum of conversations and the clinking of coffee cups. I could barely focus on what was happening around me. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Tom and what he was hiding. I had to know the truth. "I found something in Tom's office," I told her, my voice low. "A letter. And the key." "Something's not right, Linda. I think there's more going on than just an affair." Linda leaned in, her expression serious. She had always been the kind of person who dealt with tough situations head-on. She didn't flinch when I explained the letter I'd found. Instead, she just nodded, her sharp eyes assessing the situation. "Okay, let's take a closer look at this. I can help you, but I need to know everything you found." "The key, the letter, Emily, everything," she said, her voice calm but firm. I filled her in on everything, how I had gone to Emily's gallery, how I had found the letter in Tom's office, and how the key still remained a mystery. Linda didn't interrupt. She just listened, taking it all in. "All right," she said when I finished. "First, let's focus on the letter. If Tom's been hiding something like this for months, there's likely a bigger picture here. We'll need to track down the source of that letter. It might tell us more about what he's involved in." The more I thought about it, the more I realized Linda was right. The letter was the key to understanding everything. I needed to figure out who else was involved and what they meant by the arrangement. Over the next few days, Linda worked her connections. She was able to trace the letter back to a private law firm in downtown Houston. It turned out that the document I had found wasn't just a personal letter, it was an official communication about a will. My heart sank. Was there something about money involved in all this? Was Tom being manipulated by someone for financial gain? Linda and I went to the law firm together. The place looked far more expensive than anything I could have afforded. The receptionist was polite, but her eyes flickered with recognition as we approached the counter. I was starting to realize that this might be more than just a cheating husband and a scorned wife. "We're here to inquire about a document," Linda said, her voice professional. It concerns a will, and it's in the name of Tom Mitchell. The receptionist's smile wavered, and she quickly led us into a small conference room at the back of the office. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. Was there money involved? Was Tom hiding assets from me? What if he was planning to leave me with nothing? A man in his 50s entered the room, dressed in a sharp suit. His glasses perched on the tip of his nose, and his hair was a graying salt and pepper color. He looked every bit the part of a high-powered lawyer. "Good afternoon, Ms. Mitchell," he said with a polite smile, his tone formal. "I understand you're inquiring about a will. Please, take a seat." I sat down slowly, still unsure of what was happening. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found a letter from your firm. It was about a will, and it mentioned Tom Mitchell. I need to know what's going on." The lawyer's expression didn't change. He simply nodded and placed a file on the table between us. "I was expecting this inquiry," he said. "Mr. Mitchell has made some recent changes to his will. It's not unusual for clients in his position to want to ensure their wishes are clear." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What changes?" The lawyer flipped open the file, scanning through the papers inside. He didn't look at me immediately, but when he did, there was something in his eyes, something that felt almost too calculated. "Mr. Mitchell made specific provisions for a certain individual," he said slowly, his voice calm but carrying weight. "This is all in accordance with his wishes, and there's nothing out of the ordinary about it." My mind was spinning. "Who is this individual?" I demanded, my voice trembling now. The lawyer hesitated for a moment before answering. "A woman named Emily Parks." I froze. Emily. Again. She was mentioned in Tom's will. Was this part of the plan all along? Was she somehow involved in everything? The pieces were falling into place, but I still couldn't understand what was happening. Why would Tom leave anything to Emily in his will? Was he planning to leave her something? Was I just some fool in the middle of a bigger game? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions take control. Not yet. I needed to know more. "How much did Tom leave her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The lawyer's eyes flicked to the file, then back to me. "That's not something I can disclose, Ms. Mitchell. All I can tell you is that she is mentioned in his will, and she stands to benefit in certain ways." I was stunned. I had no idea how deep this betrayal went. Not only had Tom been seeing Emily behind my back, but now it seemed he was setting up an entire financial future with her in mind. The affair was one thing, but this was something else entirely. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need a copy of that will," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "I'm afraid I can't provide you with that," the lawyer replied, his tone now a bit colder. "The will hasn't been executed yet, and only Mr. Mitchell can make those requests." I didn't say anything else. There was nothing more I could do here. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As I walked out of the law firm, my mind was racing. I had to confront Tom. He had been playing me, using me as part of some twisted game I hadn't even been aware of. Emily, his secret lover, was set to benefit from everything. I had to make him pay for this. I didn't waste any time. The moment I left the law firm, I knew what I had to do next. The truth was hanging over my head like a dark storm cloud, and I couldn't let it hang there any longer. I needed to confront Tom. I needed him to explain everything, why he had been seeing Emily, why she was involved in his will, and why, after everything we'd been through, he would betray me like this. I arrived home that evening, my hands shaking as I gripped the door handle. I knew this confrontation was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even processed everything I'd learned, and now, I was about to face the man who had destroyed my entire world. Tom was sitting on the couch, his usual spot when he was home. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition, almost like he knew what was coming, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, waiting for me to speak. I didn't waste any time with pleasantries. I was done with the small talk, done with pretending everything was fine. I had the truth now, and I needed him to face it. I know about Emily, I said, my voice tight, controlled. Tom froze. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but I held up my hand to stop him. No. Don't try to deny it. I know everything. I know about the affair, about the will, about what you're planning with her. So, now, I need you to tell me everything. Why her? Why me? Why this? Tom stood up, running a hand through his hair as if trying to find the right words. I never wanted you to find out like this, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much I had trusted him, and how all of that had been shattered in the blink of an eye. But I held it together. I needed to hear the truth from him, no matter how painful it was. I'm listening, I said, my voice cold. Tom sighed heavily and sat back down on the couch, his eyes focused on the floor. Emily, she came into my life when I wasn't looking for anything. Things were falling apart between us, and I felt lost. She made me feel seen, heard. She didn't judge me for the things I was going through. At first, it was just harmless, but it turned into something more. I never meant to hurt you, I swear. But I couldn't stop it. I stared at him in disbelief. Was this really how he was justifying his actions? How could he say this to me? He'd had an affair, and he was trying to make it sound like it was some sort of accident, like it had just happened to him. You couldn't stop it? I repeated, my voice rising. You think that excuses what you've done? You think it's okay because she made you feel good? Tom's face twisted with guilt, but there was something else there too. Something I couldn't quite place. No, of course not. But you don't understand. This was never just about her. It's about everything. Everything I'd been holding in for years. I felt like I was losing myself. I shook my head, fighting back tears. What does that even mean, Tom? You couldn't come to me? You couldn't talk to me? You're married to me. We have a life together, a family. How could you throw all of that away for someone else? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he ran a hand over his face, looking exhausted. I didn't think it would come to this. But I had a choice to make, and I made it. And now I have to live with it. I could feel my heart shattering with every word he spoke. But there was more. There had to be. I wasn't going to let him off the hook just because he was offering weak excuses. This was bigger than just an affair. He had been hiding something from me for so long, and I needed to know what it was. And the will? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why is Emily in it? Why is she getting something from you when I've been here all these years, supporting you, building our life together? Tom's eyes widened, and he looked as if I had just struck him. What? How do you know about that? I found the letter, I said, my voice hard. I found it in your office, Tom. The letter from your lawyer. The one about Emily. What's going on? Why are you leaving her something? And don't lie to me. I've already heard the truth. Tom took a deep breath, his expression growing darker. It's complicated, he began, but I cut him off. Stop, I snapped. Stop with the excuses. I'm tired of hearing it. You've been planning something behind my back, and I'm not going to sit here while you feed me lies. Tom stood up suddenly, his hands raised in surrender. I'm not lying. But I don't know how to explain this to you. You're not going to understand. I've made arrangements for her because she's been a part of my life in ways you don't even know. But I never meant for you to find out like this. I was trying to figure things out. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I repeated, my voice breaking. You think leaving me in the dark, lying to me for months, is protecting me? Tom, you've destroyed everything. And now you want to explain it away like it was nothing? He looked pained, but he didn't seem to have any real answers. I knew then that I had to make a decision. He wasn't going to fix this. He wasn't going to make it right. The man I had built my life with, the man I thought I knew, was gone, replaced by a stranger who was too cowardly to face the consequences of his actions. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said quietly. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. Tom's face fell. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away, my body stiff with the weight of everything I had learned. I think you need to go, I said, the words coming out in a harsh whisper. I think we both need some space to think about everything. I need time. I need to figure out what comes next. Tom didn't fight me. He just stood there for a moment, looking at me as though he was trying to find something to say. But there was nothing left to say. I had heard enough. He left the room silently, and I was left standing there, alone with my thoughts, with the wreckage of my marriage around me. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. The days following my confrontation with Tom were some of the most painful of my life. Our house felt emptier than ever before. Every room seemed to echo with the silence that had once been filled with the sounds of our family, our laughter, our arguments, our life. Now, there was nothing. Just the hollow, unbearable silence of a marriage that had cracked open and spilled everything out into the open. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't stay in a house that reminded me of the lies, the betrayal, the man I thought I knew. So, I did what I never thought I would do. I started to make a plan. It wasn't just about confronting Tom anymore, it was about reclaiming my life. The first thing I did was find a lawyer. Linda had helped me with the contact details for a reputable family attorney, someone who had dealt with cases of divorce, infidelity, and financial settlements. I wasn't sure what Tom had planned with Emily, but I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything. I had spent too many years supporting him, too many years building a life for us and for our family, to let him just hand it over to someone else without a fight. The lawyer, a woman named Rebecca, was calm and collected as she walked me through the legal steps. She didn't promise me easy victories, but she made it clear that I had options. We went over everything, the will, the assets, Tom's finances, and Rebecca assured me that there were ways to protect myself, even if Tom had been hiding things. But what surprised me the most was when she brought up something I hadn't expected, a clause in our prenuptial agreement. I hadn't even thought about the prenup. It had been signed years ago, when Tom and I were young, naive, and blissfully unaware of the possibility of something like this happening. But now, the terms of that agreement, which had once seemed like just a formality, were suddenly the key to my freedom. Rebecca laid it out for me. The prenup had a clause about infidelity. If either party was found to have committed adultery, the other party would receive a significantly larger share of the assets in a divorce settlement. It wasn't a perfect safety net, but it was something. And it gave me leverage, something I had desperately needed. As I sat across from Rebecca, listening to her explain the ins and outs of the agreement, a sense of clarity washed over me. I had been so consumed by the emotional pain of Tom's betrayal that I hadn't considered what was in my best interest financially. But now, I saw a path forward, a way to take control of the situation. I didn't need Tom's approval. I didn't need his promises. I had everything I needed to move on: strength, resolve, and the knowledge that I wasn't alone. When I left Rebecca's office, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had a plan, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some power back. But as I walked out into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Tom. "I need to talk. Can we meet? I'm sorry for everything. I want to fix this." I stopped in my tracks, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore him. Part of me wanted to tell him that it was too late, that I didn't need him anymore. But there was another part of me, maybe it was the part that still loved him, the part that still believed in what we once had, that wondered if there was a way to fix this, if there was any chance of salvaging our marriage. I thought about the last few weeks. The lies. The heartbreak. The way he had used me as if I was some kind of fallback plan while he carried on with someone else. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were. But at the very least, I owed it to myself to hear him out. I agreed to meet him the following day, and when the time came, I found myself sitting in a small cafe, nervously tapping my fingers on the table, waiting for Tom to arrive. He walked in a few minutes later, looking older than I remembered. His face was drawn, and his eyes were tired. But there was something else in them now, regret, perhaps, or maybe just the desperation of a man who knew he had lost everything. He sat down across from me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was thick, heavy with all the things we hadn't yet said. Finally, Tom spoke, his voice quiet and hesitant. "I know I've made mistakes," he said, looking down at his hands. "I've been a fool. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to fix this. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I can do to make it right." I met his eyes then, my heart still raw from everything he had put me through. The words were on the tip of my tongue, the anger, the pain, the betrayal I had been holding onto for so long. But instead, I just let out a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. "Tom," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You can't fix this. You've already made your choices, and those choices have consequences. I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were. But I've made a decision. I'm moving forward. I'm not staying in this marriage anymore." Tom's face fell. "What are you saying?" he whispered. "I'm saying I'm done," I replied. "I'm done being your second choice. I'm done with the lies. I'm done with the secrets. I deserve better than that, Tom." I could see the pain in his eyes, but I felt nothing. There was no satisfaction in his suffering, no joy in seeing him break down. But there was something else, something that had been missing for so long. There was peace. "I've already spoken with a lawyer," I added, my voice still calm. "We'll go through the proper channels, and I'll get what I'm entitled to. But we're finished. I want a divorce." The words stung in the air between us, final and irreversible. But they were also liberating. I wasn't going to stay tied to a man who had betrayed me. I wasn't going to let him dictate my future anymore. Tom sat there in silence, looking like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a long moment, we just sat there, separated by the weight of everything we'd lost. Finally, Tom stood up, his hands shaking. "I never meant for it to end like this," he said, his voice strained. "I'm sorry. Truly." I nodded, but I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choices. Now, I had to make mine. And the first choice I made was to move on, to take control of my life, and to never look back. The divorce proceedings were as painful as I had imagined they would be, but not for the reasons I had expected. When Tom and I first married, I believed we would be together forever, that we'd weather any storm as long as we had each other. And though we had our fair share of struggles, I never thought I'd be sitting across from him in a cold, sterile courtroom, fighting for the future we once promised to each other. It was strange, sitting there on the opposite side of the room, the man I had once loved now a stranger. Tom had hired a lawyer, one of the best, I'm sure. But I had Rebecca, my lawyer, who was just as determined to fight for me as I was to fight for myself. Tom had his charm, his expensive suit, and his well-rehearsed lines. But I had something more valuable, the truth. The courtroom was small but tense. It was a place of decisions, of finalities. I had imagined this moment so many times in my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for how real it would feel. The judge was a woman in her early 50s, with a stern but fair demeanor. She listened intently to the arguments, her eyes flicking between us, weighing the evidence, reading the room. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it. The final chapter in a story that had already been written, whether I liked it or not. Tom's lawyer was the first to speak. He was a smooth-talking, polished man with a practiced smile. He started by outlining Tom's assets, his salary, his investments, his retirement plans, all the things Tom had worked for. The wealth that he had accumulated while I had worked at home, raised our children, and supported him through thick and thin. But there was something I wasn't prepared for. The lawyers seemed to be painting a picture of Tom as a victim, someone who had been misunderstood, who had made a mistake, but was now remorseful and ready to move forward. I gripped the edge of the table, trying not to let my emotions overtake me. Tom was pretending, just like he had for so long. The truth was, he had made his choices. He had thrown away everything we built for a lie, and now, in front of a judge, he was trying to play the part of the wronged husband. Rebecca, my lawyer, stood up to respond. Her voice was calm but commanding as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "we are here today not just to divide assets, but to acknowledge the emotional and personal toll this marriage has taken on my client. My client has given years of her life to a man who not only cheated on her but then tried to cover up his betrayal with lies. We are asking for a fair settlement, one that acknowledges the hurt, the deceit, and the emotional damage that has been done." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I heard Rebecca speak. This wasn't just about the money or the house. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. I had been a part of this marriage for so long, and now, I wasn't going to let Tom get away with trying to minimize what he had done. When it was my turn to speak, my voice was steady, though I could feel the weight of my words. I've spent the past 25 years supporting my family, taking care of our children, and giving everything to a marriage that, for a long time, I believed was built on trust. What Tom has done is not just a betrayal of me, it is a betrayal of everything we've worked for. And now, I am here, seeking not just financial compensation, but a chance to move forward with my life, without him. Tom didn't look at me during my statement. He kept his eyes on the judge, his jaw clenched, his hands folded in front of him. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. Guilt didn't undo the hurt he had caused. It didn't undo the trust he had broken. The judge listened attentively, and when both sides had finished their arguments, she asked for a brief recess. Tom's lawyer and Rebecca stepped out of the room for a moment, leaving me alone with Tom. For a moment, I wondered if he would say something, apologize, admit his wrongs, or maybe even beg for my forgiveness. But he didn't. He just sat there, silent, the weight of his actions hanging in the air between us. I stared at him, my emotions swirling. I had loved him once. I had built a life with him. But now, sitting across from him, I saw him for what he really was, a man who had betrayed me, who had torn apart everything I had worked so hard to build. He didn't deserve my forgiveness. He didn't deserve a second chance. When Rebecca and Tom's lawyer returned, we all took our seats. The judge returned shortly after, and we all stood as she took her place. The decision came quickly. After reviewing the evidence and considering the arguments from both sides, she said, her voice firm, "The court has decided to grant the divorce. As for the division of assets, given the circumstances surrounding the marriage and Mr. Mitchell's actions, I am awarding Mrs. Mitchell a larger portion of the assets, including the family home, as well as an alimony settlement." I felt a rush of emotions flood through me. Relief. Justice. The realization that I was finally free. Tom's face fell as the judge's words sunk in. He didn't speak, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. I wasn't sure if he was angry at the decision or angry at himself, but I didn't care. The judge wrapped up the session, and we were dismissed. As we left the courtroom, I felt a lightness in my step. The hardest part was over. The truth had been acknowledged, and now, it was time for me to move forward. Tom didn't speak to me as we left, and I didn't want him to. He had said everything he needed to say during the proceedings, and I had said everything I needed to say. There was no more room for words, no more room for apologies. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. I was no longer a wife betrayed. I was a woman who had taken control of her life, who had stood up for herself and her future. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure, I was free. The days following the divorce were strange. At first, I felt a sense of liberation, like the heavy weight that had been dragging me down for so long had finally been lifted. But as the weeks passed, the emotional toll of everything I had been through began to settle in. I had spent so many years building a life with Tom, so many years living with the belief that our marriage was solid, that I was doing everything right. And then, in one fell swoop, it all unraveled. But here I was, still standing. Still breathing. Still capable of building something new. The first thing I did after the divorce was final was sell the house. It was the home where I had raised our children, the home where I had built so many memories with Tom. But it was also the home where I had been betrayed, the home that had witnessed the destruction of everything I had worked for. It wasn't the place I wanted to remain in. It wasn't where I saw my future. The sale wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. I spent hours going through boxes, sorting through things, old photographs, gifts we had given each other, souvenirs from vacations long past. Each item seemed to hold a memory, a fragment of a life I had lived, but no longer recognized. I had to let go of it all, not just physically, but emotionally. It was the only way I could truly move on. I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous or extravagant, but it was mine. It was a space where I could breathe, where I could begin the process of rebuilding. The first night in that apartment, I stood by the window, watching the sunset. I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in months. The world was still turning. My life was still moving forward. In the weeks that followed, I started to rediscover myself. I found hobbies I had forgotten about, painting, reading, long walks in the park. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Linda, of course, was by my side every step of the way, helping me navigate this new chapter of my life. She even convinced me to take a vacation, something I had never done for myself. I went to the coast, to a small seaside town, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. I wasn't thinking about Tom, or Emily, or the betrayal. I was thinking about me. About what I wanted. About what was next. That trip was a turning point. When I returned, I felt different. Stronger. More sure of myself than I had in years. I was no longer the woman whose life had been turned upside down by infidelity. I was no longer the woman who had built a life around a man who had betrayed her. I was a woman who had taken control, who had stood up for herself, and who had reclaimed her future. Tom tried to contact me a few times after the divorce was final, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I didn't need closure from him. The closure I had was in the decision I had made, to move on, to take back control of my life. There was no moment of dramatic confrontation, no final showdown between us. Tom had made his choices, and now, I was making mine. I didn't need him anymore. I had everything I needed to move forward on my own. A few months after the divorce, I was sitting in a coffee shop when I ran into someone I hadn't expected, Emily. She was with a friend, sitting across from me at the next table. For a moment, I considered getting up and leaving, but then I realized something. Emily wasn't the source of my pain anymore. She was just a part of the past, a past I was done with. I looked at her briefly, and when our eyes met, she didn't seem surprised to see me. There was no smugness in her expression, no defiance. It was just acknowledgement. I didn't know what kind of life she had now, or if she and Tom were still together. Frankly, I didn't care. But what I did know was that I had survived this. I had come through it. And that, in itself, was enough. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We both knew where we stood. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my career. I had put so much of myself into Tom and our family that I had neglected my own ambitions. But now, with the freedom that came from the divorce, I was able to focus on the things I loved. I started a small interior design business, working with local clients to create beautiful spaces. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had put off for years. Now, it was my time to shine. I realized that, while my marriage with Tom had been a huge part of my life, it didn't define me. I was more than just his wife. I was more than just the woman who had been betrayed. I was strong, capable, and deserving of happiness, happiness I could create on my own. Tom's life, on the other hand, seemed to fall apart in ways I never would have imagined. He lost his job shortly after the divorce, and the business he had worked so hard to build began to crumble. Emily, I heard, eventually moved on too, though I never got the full story. Their affair had been nothing more than a brief chapter in both of our lives, and now, they were both reaping the consequences of their choices. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't need to. Their actions had caught up with them in ways they couldn't have foreseen. As for me, I continued to build my life. One day at a time. And with each passing day, I became stronger. I looked back at my marriage with Tom not with bitterness, but with understanding. It had been a chapter in my life, and now it was over. But it was only one chapter in the book of my life. There were many more to come. And this time, I would be the author of my own story. Author's note: this story reflects the painful truth that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest healing. Though Tom's betrayal was devastating, it allowed the protagonist to rediscover her strength and begin a new chapter on her own terms. Life may throw unexpected challenges our way, but it's our choices in response that shape our future.